Thanks, guys. Thank you, guys. Wall Builders, find out about us, wallbuilders.com. Based on the Bible book of Nehemiah, the concept of rebuilding things that have been torn down, religious, moral, constitutional foundations. You can find out about us there. I want to take you into what I think is happening in the country right now and what I think the challenge before us is. I'm all over the nation right now. In the next 9 days, I'll be in 8 states, 14 cities, pastors' conferences, meeting with Christian leaders, etc. And the thing we're hearing all across the nation is we've got to have a revival. We see stuff going on. We know that it's not good, so we're praying for revival. And I think we've got a problem with that. National revival doesn't occur nationally. We think it does, and we keep looking for things to happen on the national level, and that's not where revivals occur. National revivals occur locally. Now, people say, well, wait a minute, you got a great awakening. That is a national revival. Well, kind of, but maybe not. George Whitefield is the guy that we point to with that national revival. George Whitefield preached 34 years. He preached 18,000 sermons, and grab this, in a day back then, with no technology anywhere close to what we have today, 80% of all Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, you think Twitter and those guys wouldn't like to have 80% message penetration? You bet. How did you get 80% message penetration when there's no technology? It's real easy. He was the chaplain in the state of Georgia. He got on his horse in Georgia. He rode all the way to Maine, which was Massachusetts then. It didn't become a state till 50 years later. He rode to Maine, and up in Maine, he preached from Maine to Georgia. Now, every town he went through, he stopped and preached in every town he went through. When he got to Maine, he turned around and rode back to Georgia. He took a different route. He stopped in every town he went through coming back. When he got to Georgia, he turned around and went back to Maine, took a different route, preached in every town he went through. He made 7 trips from Georgia to Maine to Georgia, 34 years. The reason 80% of all Americans physically heard him preach a sermon was because he was in 80% of the towns of America having revivals in 80% of the towns. Revival would break out in local towns, and local minister would keep it going for years longer. When he was in Western Virginia, the Reverend Samuel Davies kept the revival going another 19 years. When he was in Boston, it was Samuel Cooper that kept it going another 10 years. When he was in Philadelphia, it was Gilbert Tennant who kept it going another 12 years. Revivals broke out in all these local areas. We call it a national revival because it affected so much of America, but it wasn't a national revival. It was local revivals that spread across the nation. And when you look at local revivals, how they spread across the nation, the same thing occurs with the birth of the nation. When you go back to our American Revolution, our War for Independence, you take the first 4 battles in the American War for Independence. Top right, you have Lexington. Top left, Bridge at Concord. Bottom left is Road to Boston. Bottom right is Bunker Hill. It's interesting, those first 4 battles that began independence, nobody contacted George and said, George, you're the national commander-in-chief. We are really outnumbered here. We got to have your help in a hurry. Nobody contacted George because the whole mindset was, it's our community, George. We'll take care of it. You got important things to do. We'll take care of our community. And that's the way the American War for Independence went. Most folks don't have a clue that in the American War for Independence, there were more than 120 battles. Can you name 120 battles? No, we can name 4 or 5. That's all we learn about. See, most of the battles you would never even recognize. You look at the titles on those battles, we don't recognize those. And see, the American War for Independence was a whole bunch of local battles, and we won so many of those local battles that we won the national battle, but we won the national battle by winning the local battles. It's just like revival. So we're looking for change in the nation. We're looking for revival in the nation. We want political change in the nation. We want change at the White House. We want change at Congress. We want all this change. Great. You're looking at the wrong place. Look at a different place. Look at locally, because that's where change occurs, is locally. When you look at this from a political standpoint, you look at it in the sense of voting, we have an obsession with the national focus. You know, Richard, and you guys are going to be a little more informed, but if I ask most group, I say, who's the president of the United States? I'm going to get an answer, and most people get it. If I say, who's the president of your local school board? Maybe 1 or 2%. If I say, name 3 federal lawmakers. Give me 3 federal lawmakers. You can do that. If I say, name 3 of your city's lawmakers, your city council members, we're down to nearly nothing. We're much more informed on what happens nationally, and we can do much less to change what happens nationally than what we can do to change locally. So our obsession with the national focus really has to be turned back locally. It's because of what we have with media and technology now that we think in big, grandiose terms. It comes back to, as the Great Commission says, Jerusalem, right where you live, then Judea, then Samaria, then the uttermost parts of the earth. We keep doing the uttermost parts of the earth. We got to do the Jerusalem part, right where we live. So when you look at where we are politically, voting is really a simple thing, but I want to take it to the local level, because at the local level, only about 6% of Americans vote at a local level. And by the way, that's 6% of registered voters. Only 65.3% of American adults are registered voters. So we have roughly 100 million American adults who can vote but who don't vote because they won't register. We've got roughly 40 million evangelicals who can vote but they don't vote because they won't register. You imagine how different America would be if 40 million evangelicals were to actually participate, the ones that don't participate right now. So what happens is when you look at a local, 6% of 65.3% or 6% of registered voters, usually local turnout has about 4%. It takes half of that to win, which is 2%. Let me give you examples of how that plays out in real life. If you take a city like Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States. Los Angeles population is so large that the population of Los Angeles is larger than the population of 23 separate individual states. So if you're Eric Garcetti, who is the mayor of Los Angeles, that's like being a governor in 23 different states. Eric Garcetti, who is very hostile to faith, he closed the churches down, left everything else open, but we definitely got to get those churches shut. He brags that he was elected with 2.9% of the vote. Really? It's like a governor, yeah, we don't pay attention to local stuff, and he has a huge impact on what happens there, whether it be on the way they handle crime or the way they handle anything else. Let me take you to another city. Fort Worth is very close to where I live. I was raised right around Fort Worth. I'm a cowboy from Texas, and 6.5 years ago, the Fort Worth Independent School District said, hey, you know, we've been looking at it, and we've looked at this gender thing, and we just think that we're not going to do this gender stuff anymore in schools. We're going to let kids choose whatever restroom they want. They can choose whatever locker room they want. They can choose whatever shower room they want. We're just not going to do genders in school anymore. This is Fort Worth, Texas, cowboy town. Interestingly, at that time, President Obama was in office, and his Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, said, that's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Here's the new national policy. He said, if your school gets federal funds, which is more than 97% of the schools in America, we're not going to do gender stuff in school anymore. We're not going to have gender identification. You just whatever you want. And so it changes this point. Now, this is really frustrating for people like me, because if you know anything about Fort Worth, Texas, its nickname is called Cowtown, USA. Literally twice a day in Fort Worth, at 11 in the morning, at 11:30 in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we shut down North Main Street and have a cattle drive up and down Main Street. We take these Longhorns up and down Main Street. Now, it's interesting, Fort Worth, I told you I'm a cowboy from Texas. You may not be a cowboy. You may not even like the cowboy life at all. It doesn't matter. I can stick any of you behind that herd of cattle, and all of you can tell me the gender of every critter in that cow. It's really not a difficult thing to do. And so for Fort Worth, Texas, to come up with we don't know what genders are, and we don't, it's craziness. So I looked in Fort Worth, and Fort Worth has 918,000 voters. That's the 13th largest city in the United States, and the president of the school board who came up with this silly policy was elected with less than 1,200 votes. 1,182 votes is what he elected with. So I went and looked in the district where he was elected from, and I instantly found dozens of evangelical churches in that district. As a matter of fact, I found one church that by itself had 3,000 registered evangelical voters. That one church could have prevented that guy from being on the school board, which would have saved the entire nation from 6.5 years of gender nonsense that we've been having over that period of time. It went back to a local election that didn't get solved. Local stuff becomes national stuff. If you want to fix the national, you fix the local, and Fort Worth is a good example of that. A couple more quick examples. In Bentonville, Arkansas, the hometown of Walmart, town of 40,000 people. Christian lady in Bentonville said, you're sure not doing this in my school board, because I'm running for school board. And she did. She ran for school board, and in that town of 40,000, she was elected. There was a total of 35 votes cast in the school board election. She got the majority of the 35 votes. Any Sunday school class in Bentonville could have elected her to office, just a single Sunday school class. And she said the same thing in Riceville, Iowa. Riceville's the northern part of Iowa. A farmer there in Riceville said, you're not going to do this in our schools. I'm running for school board. He did run for school board. Turned out that on election day, he got busy on the farm and did not go vote. And don't think that he lost by one vote, because that's not the story. The story is not a single person voted in the school board election. If he had voted for himself, he would be sitting on the school board simply by voting for himself. See, this is where change actually occurs at the local level. That's the local focus that we have to have. Benjamin Rush, who's a founding father, one of the 250 founding fathers. John Adams said of all the 250 founding fathers, he said Benjamin Rush is one of the three most notable. Benjamin Rush, John Adams, by the way, said it was George Washington number one, Ben Franklin number two, Benjamin Rush number three. And Benjamin Rush, amazing. He started the first Sunday school movement in America, started the Bible Society in America, started the first Abolition Society in America, trained the first women for academic education, trained the first black physicians, started 5 universities, signed the Declaration, ratified the Constitution, served in 3 different presidents' administrations. He's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. Just amazing. We know nothing about him with our education today. One of the chief people in American foundation, we know nothing about him. And significantly, he's called the father of public schools under the Constitution because of the piece that he did in 1790. In 1790, he said, you know, we used to be 13 different nations, and we were. In America, back in those early days, colonial days, we didn't really like each other. Even North and South Carolina had border wars with each other. They each had their own separate currency. And if you went from North Carolina to South Carolina, you stopped at the border, exchanged your currency. I mean, we just didn't get along. We were 13 nations. We were like Europe. And now that we're a nation, Benjamin Rush says, what do we need to be teaching in our public schools if we're going to be a unified nation rather than 13 independent nations? If we're going to be one nation, and he said real simple. He said the number one purpose of public education in America is to teach students to love and serve God. He said the number 2 purpose of public education in America is to teach students to love and serve their country. The number 3 purpose of public education in America is to teach students to love and serve their family. Now, notice the order that he has here. The order that he has here, most Christians I know today would say, no, family should go next because family is so much more important. He said, no, you're absolutely wrong. Country is higher than family. Now, why would that be? Because he pointed out that if you ever lose control of your country, it will become the great enemy of your family. And that's exactly what we're finding now. So many of the policies we're fighting in local school districts, et cetera, it's because we haven't been engaged. We haven't been involved. We don't even know who serves because we've been too busy taking care of our family. And in the meantime, they're passing all these policies that are killing our family, killing our culture. And so as a result of that, this is where local elections have become really an emphasis in the last 18 to 24 months. I've never seen in America what I'm seeing in the last 18 to 24 months. Take you to Virginia real quick. That's one of the 5 states that has an off-year election. They had their governor's election last November. And what happened was Faith Wins, group that we work very closely with. I'm headed out today, actually, for Faith Wins meetings for the rest of the week. And Faith Wins went in and we were able to identify 312 churches in Virginia. None of them are mega churches, it's just all community churches. Said, guys, you got an election coming up for governor and you really got to do something different. Your previous governor said, he passed a law that says if a child survives an abortion, it's okay to go ahead and let that child die after it's born. We're not going to save it after it's born. And by the way, that led to the movement we now see where the governor of Maryland said, well, that's a good idea. We're going to have abortions in Maryland up to 28 days after birth. You can still abort a baby up to 28 days after they're born. California said, we can beat that. We're going to make it 30 days. You can abort a baby up to 30 days after they're born. It's already passed one of the chambers in California. So with what was going on in Virginia, need something different. 312 churches got involved and said, guys, look in your own pews. Find Christians who have biblical values, biblical beliefs, who have never before registered, who have never before voted. Get them registered, get them to go vote biblical values. Those 312 churches came up with 77,000 individuals who had never before voted, Christians with biblical values, got them registered, got them to vote. And Youngkin, who, by the way, is a reverse opposite of what the previous governor was. As a matter of fact, pastors in Virginia on Inauguration Day last January, they were really concerned because they looked at the program and there was no inaugural prayer in the program. And here's a Christian governor, no inaugural prayer. That's because he prayed his own inaugural prayer. And he prayed in Jesus' name on the Capitol steps very boldly, very openly, very, very out front. So he was elected with a margin of 64,500 votes. Oh, Those 312 churches provided 77,000 right there. And there's tens of thousands of churches in Virginia. Just that little bit of involvement made the difference. And by the way, they had 1,343 poll watchers out of those churches who decided to get involved. 2 Timothy 2:5 says you can't be crowned if you don't run according to the rules. What are the rules? Most of us don't know. They identified 5.2% of the vote as being fraudulent. Now, if you take 5.2% of the vote off, that'll win most elections at that point in time. They did so many things that made a difference. Same thing happened in Colorado in that same election cycle. Truth and Liberty was able to come up with 1,500 churches. We got 78 people elected to the school board. These are just headlines from that back in that election. Canada's opposing critical race theory. Christians won school boards in Minnesota. Minnesota is not a Christian-friendly place. Churches got involved, made a difference. You see the same thing. I love this one out of New Jersey. 19-year-old who saw a senior year disrupted by COVID shutdowns unseats the incumbent in a school board race. So this kid said, "You cost me my senior year, I'm running against you." He beat the incumbent by 17 points. And it's really nice to finally have some adults on the school board in New Jersey too, by the way. So this is Denver. Christians got the school board in Denver. Same thing with Wichita, 3 out of 4 spots there. Churches got involved in Wichita. Same with Boise, Treasure Valley, most liberal city in Idaho by far. Christians got the school board there. And Dallas, 51 churches got together. There were 15 open school board seats. They won all 15 seats, all of them by a 60-40 margin, most of them by 70-30 margin. You have Colorado Springs, 4 of the school boards districts flipped here. Again, Christians were able to be engaged in that. Again, Truth and Liberty involved 1,500 churches, 78 different positions picked up. So it made a real difference. Houston, we were able to pick up churches in Houston. We picked up the school board in Houston. That's a city of 2.3 million people. And Christians now have the school board in Houston. Do you know how many tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of kids that is? It's a massive impact that's happening. Same Fort Worth. This happened just a few weeks ago. There's a church in Fort Worth who got involved. There were 21 school board seats in Fort Worth. They won 20 of the 21 school board seats just out of that church. So a lot going on. This is going on all over the nation. Final thing I'll close with is a statement from Charles Finney. Charles Finney was in the Second Great Awakening. It's estimated that in 1 year alone, Charles Finney in 1857, 1858 led 100,000 people to Christ. But Charles Finney was a revivalist. He wanted America to have revivals. And in 1835, he wrote a book on how to have revivals in America. That book, it's a great book to read, but he is very different from what we hear today. He says, guys, you don't need to pray for revival. What he did was in that book, he went in and took the if-then verses in the Bible. If-then, 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people which are called by my name will do this, God says, then I will do this. He says, if you want God to do that, you don't have to pray about this. Just do what he said and he will do what he said. If you do the if, he'll do the then. So he said, if you want a revival, and so that's what that book is. It's the if-then verses. And going through those if-then verses, this is what he says in lecture number 15. He said, the church must take right ground in regard to politics. Politics are part of a religion in the country as this, and Christians who do their duty to the country as part of their duty to God. He says, God will bless or curse this nation according to the course that Christians take in politics. Now, interestingly, why is this part of a revival book? Because this is lecture number 15 where he said this is a hindrance to revival. If you want to stop a revival from occurring in a nation, just stay out of politics. If you want to see a revival, you've got to get involved because righteousness exalts a nation. We know that out of Scripture, Proverbs 14:34. But the only way you get righteousness is Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. It's not going to be wicked leaders that put righteous policies in that God can bless. We love to sing the song, God Bless America, but my goodness, give them something to work with. The only way you're going to do that is you got to have leaders who will give policies that God can bless. That's what leads to revival. God bless you guys. Thanks for letting me share.